So welcome to this edition of Kim Morgan's Straight Brain Radio. And in this episode, I'm going to discuss singularity. Now, some people say that singularity is a pretty bad idea. It's nothing but a public relations stunt. While some people say that there is a genuine possibility of the artificial intelligence systems turning into a singularity, and then things would change for humanity. So, this is a potentially very important topic, and it'll be fitting to discuss singularity while I'm walking in Shinjuku. The first time I encountered this word, singularity, I had my doubts. Of course, I was a physics major, and I'm familiar with phase transitions and black holes, where there's a space-time singularity, and so it'll be interesting to, think that as the artificial intelligence systems developed, there might be some similar development in its dynamics and functionalities. And when that happens, of course, the human civilization as a whole would be affected. But, it was not immediately clear what singularity meant. Of course, I was aware of the writings by Ray Kurzweil, but the way it was pinned down to a specific year, like 2045, sounded dubious. In this country, in Japan, there were many people who would ask such a naive questions like, do you really think that singularity would occur in the year 2045? And which was a kind of stupid, wasn't it? Of course, nobody can predict that, and there's no significance to the specific year, 2045. So I was naturally distrustful about those people. But then I encountered this very interesting paper by I.J. Good. I.J. Good was a colleague of none other than Alan Turing, and together they worked to decipher the German code of cryptograph Enigma. And I.J. Good was a really interesting person, and he defined what was meant by singularity in a paper in which he discussed the idea of self-improving artificial intelligence. And famously, he said that if we could invent artificial intelligence system which would be able to improve upon itself, then that would be the last invention of humanity. Because if once you have a seed artificial intelligence system that would improve upon themselves, then there's nothing else to do for humans. You can just leave it as it is, and the artificial intelligence system would just improve itself. So there's nothing left for humanity to do. And that was certainly a very interesting idea. So I.J. Good's paper was well defined in a way, taken with the fact that he was a technically savvy researcher, collaborating with Alan Turing towards the deciphering of Enigma, seemed to give the idea of singularity some authenticity and trustworthiness. But then I.J. Good himself didn't define the concept of singularity well enough to be discussed in a pure technical domain. It is also interesting that I.J. Good was the person who was the conceptor of the HAL computer in the film 2001 Space Odyssey, which is arguably one of the greatest films ever made by the genius of Stanley Kubrick. And in it, HAL which was thought to be related to IBM, which probably isn't the case, it becomes super intelligent and surpasses human intelligence, and singularity is reached, so that how goes into a rebellion mode. And so this whole story about how and its rebellion against humans is based on I.J. Good's concept of singularity. So it is quite interesting to think that in the fictional film, Space 2001 Space Odyssey, there was already this implementation of the concept of singularity, which was rampant a few years back. But then people stopped talking about singularity. Probably they realized that this idea, like singularity coming in 2045, was ridiculous at best, and so people stopped worrying about it. But then, as you know it, we have had this series of revolutions in large language models, like ChatGPT, and also graphics generating artificial intelligence like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E 2. And then there was this feeling that, hey, wait, maybe there's something going on with artificial intelligence. And apparently they are far better than we expected them to be. And of course, these things were brought about by this conceptualization of the transformer idea, which was proposed by Google in 2007. But that was only a few years ago. And if we wait a few years more, maybe there will be more powerful artificial intelligence systems. And given the fact that a lot of money and energy and intelligence is put into these things, probably there's a genuine possibility that singularity will be reached in some time. So there's this renewed feeling of imminent singularity now in the air because of large language models and so on. So we are living in a really interesting time when ideas about singularity are exchanged between people, and some people are of course skeptical. I remain skeptical about the whole idea actually, but at the same time it's quite possible that something approaching singularity might actually occur in one way or another in the near future. And when that happens, it will change the human society in a fundamental way. So we are living in a very interesting time. So it will be fitting to discuss singularity in an in-depth, technically robust way. Now, going back to this paper by I.J. Good, this idea of improving oneself is, of course, something that can be defined conceptually, but something that is actually difficult to pin down exactly what it means. And actually, I'm coming to a place where I would like to take lunch, probably, so I will probably stop recording here and probably would come back to you later. Okay, so I'm having lunch. Yes, I'm definitely having lunch. Okay, so see you later. So I've now had lunch at a place called Satsuki, which literally means May. Satsuki and May, the famous two girls in the film, Hayao Miyazaki film, My Neighbor Totoro. So anyway, I had a Hamburg set menu, Hamburg Teishoku. Japanese style Hamburg is really something of a hidden treasure, I think, and you should, when you come to Tokyo, you should really try that. Hamburg, Japanese people pronounce it Hamburg Teishoku kudasai. If you say that, you would be given a Hamburg set menu. it's a really, really wonderful, you know, Japanese style Western dish. Anyway, I was discussing singularity, and I was discussing I.J. Good's conceptualization of singularity, which is a very noble way to put it. To resume, if you can invent an artificial intelligence system that would improve itself, that would be the last invention for humanity. Although this, of course, is a rather fuzzy definition, and it would take a lot of energy and intelligence to work out exactly what it means to, for a human intelligence system to improve itself. It is certainly a powerful idea. And if you have artificial intelligence systems that would improve upon itself, then you really don't have to do anything about it anymore. And you won't be able to control it. So there you have this problem of how to control or contain artificial intelligence system. And there are some fictional works that deal with it. How you can make the world a safe place by, restricting the domain in which artificial intelligence systems could work, and only allowing them to go free in the world under certain conditions. Now I'm approaching Shinjuku Station, so you probably would hear a lot of noise. Today it's rather warm in Tokyo. I think the temperature is approaching 20 degrees centigrade. So officially, it's the climate that you would find in April. Although we are still in February, so I feel as if it's spring now. Anyway, so how can you contain an artificial intelligence system? That is an interesting topic in itself. And this idea of controlling an artificial intelligence system is actually very important, and it is something universal. Even if you don't talk about singularity, you can talk about the guiding principles for the learning of artificial intelligence. And I was actually talking with some people at the IBM. These people were working on the IBM AI Watson, and at the time, it was a few years ago, and at the time there were high hopes. Oh, probably there are still high hopes, but that Watson would be used for various purposes in medical domain. And at the time, it was discussed we really need to guide Watson so that we would feed the appropriate data into Watson. This alignment of artificial intelligence problem is so universal. I mean, even if you have artificial intelligence system that can improve upon itself, it's like a child, and of course we educate a child, and based according to your education, a child can grow into any kind of adult. So naturally we talk a lot about the child's education system. The same goes for artificial intelligence. We can't just let them go wild, and even if we invent improving artificial intelligence systems, we can't just let it go. We cannot apply laissez-faire principles to artificial intelligence systems. So there remains a genuinely interesting topic about how to guide artificial intelligence into growth. And I believe this is something that is probably common between humans and artificial intelligence systems. I mean, how to educate an artificial intelligence system. Even today, for example, in the large language models, there are questions of fine-tuning the artificial intelligence. Once artificial intelligence systems are out in the wild, society, it can learn a lot of inappropriate phrases and influenced by biases and prejudices and so on. So it'll be best not to expose them to inappropriate domains of data, but then it becomes a problem that if you restrict the domain of information too much, then the artificial intelligence system will not become so robust. Now I'm passing through an area, it's called Unica Vision, where a really large set of screens are showing some advertisement, I think. This is the entrance to the famous Kabukicho area. It's midday, and the famous night district is not what it would be at night, but there are many people. I don't typically come in this area, but today I am here because I had lunch in western Shinjuku, and I'm now moving to eastern Shinjuku area through a underpass called Daigeto. And that is actually the underpass through which I will be running in a few days' time in the Tokyo Marathon. So as I passed the Daigado, I was thinking of running the marathon in a few days. But anyway, so I'm passing through the crowds in Shinjuku now. And thinking about singularity. So even if you have a self-improving artificial intelligence, there could be many ways in which you can train it, and you can guide them in any ways possible. So this idea that once you have a singularity, it's up to the artificial intelligence to do whatever it can. I think it's not really realistic. Even if we have an artificial intelligence system that would improve upon itself, we can still guide them, and it will be irresponsible and unintelligent to let it go. So sometimes people argue about artificial singularity in artificial intelligence systems as if once it's there, you need to let it go, but that's not the case. Anyway, so this idea of tuning AI is very important, interesting. But then comes the really hard question of whether there is such a thing as artificial general intelligence. Because if you look at humans, then it would appear that some humans are good at, for example, mathematics, but they are not so good at communication skills, and so there are domains of functionality or abilities. And some people are good at one domain, but not so good at another. And it may be also true for artificial intelligence systems too. So this very idea of optimization, kind of a Renaissance man type general ability in a single artificial intelligence sounds dubious. So this idea of artificial general intelligence is often applied to a single artificial intelligence agent. But in reality, if you look at human society, artificial general intelligence, natural general intelligence occurs only at the team level. I mean, each of us humans are good at one thing, but not so great at another. So if there's a general intelligence, that would emerge only at the level of the whole humanity. So we are familiar with this idea that humans are, each of us are good at a certain thing, and then we make a team effort and we augment each other's strong points and weak points, and we merge it and make it resonate. And then we have a team which is, ubiquitously capable of doing things. So if I'm working in Shinjuku now and I see many artifacts and traffic lights and automobiles and shoes, I'm passing through a shoes shop and clothes shop and drug store. All these places sell different things, and they actually are made by different human beings. So, not a single human being is capable of making all these things. So this very concept of artificial general intelligence, which is tightly coupled with this idea of singularity, is suspect. It is not clear for me to whether there can ever be a truly artificial general intelligence as a single entity. What does it mean to say that an artificial intelligence system exists as a single entity? You can argue that the human society as a whole is a single agent, and you can then argue that the human species as a whole is capable of doing this, doing that in a universal way, but that is not carried out by individual human beings. It is a collective effort, and of course we have this illusion about the Renaissance man, like Leonardo da Vinci, who is capable of doing many things single-handedly, but that's only an illusion. Leonardo da Vinci was an interesting man, but he's not a genius in many aspects of science and medicine and so on, as some people would assume. He was a genius, surely, in painting, but not so much about engineering. People talk about the kind of helicopter-like machine that Leonardo made a drawing of, but that's only a cartoon. He didn't actually invent the machine. He did not do the necessary fluid dynamics calculation. So, in that sense, Leonardo da Vinci was not a genius engineer. He was just a genius painter, which is, of course, a great achievement. But probably this concept of a Renaissance man is an illusory one. So when it comes to artificial general intelligence systems, probably it's an illusion that a single system can do that. And if we equate artificial general intelligence with the whole human society, then it is really interesting to ask what exactly you mean by that. Do you mean that in the AGI, in a single AGI, collective, there are collection of agents that would work together so that if you, for example, ask it to do a certain task, then the specific appropriate agent would be invoked, and each time you ask it to do different tasks, a slightly different agent would be invoked. And would that be artificial general intelligence? Would you agree that that is artificial intelligence, general intelligence, or is it just a collection of different agents? It's a really interesting idea. So this illusion of universal intelligence is something very strong, but something that is probably not useful in designing specific intelligence systems. And if we are under the illusion when we discuss singularity, that concept itself is suspect. The singularity concept is suspect. Now I'm walking into the Shinjuku Sanchome area, my favorite area. here we have the famous Rakugo Theater, Shinjuku Suihirote, which is a wonderful place to be. I can't go into it today because I need to do things. But when I have time, which I don't most of the time nowadays, I love to go into the Shinjuku Suihirote because it's a showcase of Rakugo, the art of Rakugo, and many Rakugo artists are there, and it's so rewarding to be there. Japan is an interesting country, but as I have been saying, I do not care too much about the current status of the comedy scene. However, I do admire the Rakugo artists which appear in Shinjuku Suihirote because it's a really robust, traditional classic art form, and I really love to watch these artists because it's so, they're wonderful, really wonderful. So I stopped recording here because I've come to the Shinjuku Suihirote. So I actually went into Shinjuku Suihirote after so many years. I can't remember when was the last time I went into Shinjuku Suihirote, but I listened to 5 artists, which is great. So I'm now back on the streets, and I'm going to a publisher for dialogue. He's a famous scholar. But meanwhile, I'm walking on the street in Tokyo, and I'm thinking about singularity again. So, as I was saying, we should, when we talk about artificial intelligence, I think we should be rather talking about a society of mind, society of intelligence, rather than a single agent. And here it becomes really difficult to pinpoint what you mean by an agent, because in biological species it's natural to think in terms of individuals, at least in the domain where we are familiar with, animals and to some extent plants. When we talk about animal survival strategies, well, sometimes we talk about genetics and how genes are, competing with each other. The so-called selfish gene idea, and brought forward by Rachel Dawkins. And of course, it's all about evolution and how each gene competes with each other. And in that context, it is natural to think in terms of individual agents, and then the border between agents is clear. But when it comes to artificial systems like artificial intelligence, the distinction is not so clear. I mean, we can talk about a collection of agents, and we can discuss the possibility that for each task different agents would be involved, and we don't really need to think in terms of what an individual like us. In the famous Bostrom classification, there are different kinds of artificial intelligence, like like an oracle. An oracle is an agent where you ask it some questions and it would come up with an answer, like in the traditional concept of an oracle in Greek mythology. And also there could be genies, like in the story 1000 Nights, Arabian Nights, and where you ask the genie to do something and the genie would execute the task for you. And then there is sovereign, where you delegate all your purposes and decision makings to that sovereign, so that it will make plans and decisions for you. So all these concepts of artificial intelligence, however, seems to be based on the idea that they are human-like agents and the individuality of the agents to be assumed in the first place. And you think in terms of each agent when you think of the functionality of the agent, and that is something that needs to be extended to the domain of artificial general intelligence in the context of singularity, and that's the usual assumption. But that is not something that you need to stick to in principle. So, as I was discussing, you can actually think in terms of the society of artificial intelligence, and there doesn't need to be just a single agent, but multiple collection of agents, and which would take in turns, and you actually even don't have to think in terms of individual agents. In the first place, you just can invoke the concept of a cloud of agents. I mean, you can have a statistical ensemble of agents distributed in the phase space, and according to the nature of task required, you can probably change the weight distribution within that phase space, and that would be a totally different conceptualization of agent. And so, there could be many different ways you can architecturize artificial intelligence systems. And so, this very concept of one single entity, rather like ourselves, dominating the world, is a suspect one. So the very concept of artificial general intelligence is, useful sometimes, but it can sometimes be misleading. And as I was discussing, probably the whole human society as a totality can be considered as an artificial general intelligence at present. And this is related to the very important aspect of resource distribution. After all, what we have in natural environment is the competition for resources: food, water, sunshine, and so mating opportunities and human. Oh, hi! I just bumped into a friend of mine, Nana Takamatsu, who is an upcoming scholar. I was so surprised. Anyway, I was talking about competition for resources, and so that's how biological systems evolve. And by the way, I don't think that Takamatsu suspected that I was recording discussions about artificial general intelligence. And anyway, where was I? So typically there would be competitions on natural resources, and it's totally the fundamental aspect of biological systems that we compete with each other for resources, and this is a really interesting aspect of the biological life, and the same can be said about artificial intelligence systems too. When in the build-up of artificial intelligence systems, AGI, of course you compete for resources and computed resources, and this idea that there's a Moore's law, and on the integrated circuits, there would each 18 months or 2 years, the concentration of the chips on the integrated circuit would be double. That is a wonderful way of economizing and saving money, and also saving time, and putting a lot of computational resources into a unit square of area. But but that hides actually the hidden agenda, which is we do need to acquire some resources for computation, and in order to do that, you probably would have to compete with other alternative intelligence systems. So in the run-up to the artificial general intelligence, probably there would be a total war on natural resources, and this is an aspect that is totally lacking from my perspective in the discussions on artificial general intelligence. You do need to have a way in which you assign a resource to a particular agent of artificial intelligence, and there should be some way to make priorities for the respective systems, and that is something that we need to do some way. And that is a hidden agenda, I think, when you talk about building artificial general systems and intelligence systems, and that is something we need to discuss really. So actually, I came quite close to the publisher where I am going to have a dialogue for a book. So I need to stop here. So this has been quite interesting, and there have been some interruptions, and by Sue Hirote, the Rakugo Theater, and my great friend Takamatsu Nano. But anyway, it has been great. So I think I'll sum up this leg of my the discussion of artificial general intelligence. Probably I will need to do this, rather singularity. Probably I will have to do this again soon. Anyway, so I will sum up with this closing statement. The idea of singularity in artificial general intelligence is a very interesting one. One that probably would stimulate our imagination and intellect to the full. And it is very interesting to discuss the many hidden agendas and implicit assumptions behind this concept. And in order to make this discussion about singularity a robust one, we really need to go back to our biological past and compare the artificial engineering principles with the principles of evolution that have nurtured our body, intelligence, and emotion, which led to the birth of the singularity idea itself. I.J. Good's paper should be referred back as classic, and would do very well to revisit our fantasies as exhibited in the films such as 2001: A Space Odyssey. With a thought, I leave you, and I'll probably come back to this very important issue sometime soon. I'm now in the suburb of Shinjuku, where I will be visiting the publisher.